reporting the news and making sense of political party manifestos, government policies, programs, as well as surveys by think tanks and other CSOs can be a daunting task for many journalists here in Ghana. This could also mean if we, the journalists, get it wrong, then we could misinform you. Imagine the problem that could create. Well, unlike the advanced countries, the media in Ghana still has quite a catching up to do. What is it that the media can learn and unlearn as far as publishing and broadcasting the political events and data are concerned in preparedness for election 2020? I am joined in studio by Democracy and Development Fellow at the Center for Democratic Development Ghana, CDD Ghana, Dr. John Osae-Kwapong, for some thoughts and experiences from some of the advanced democratic countries. Good morning, Doc. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I have with me almost all the newspapers that came out this morning.
Yeah.
And it will interest you to note that 7 out of about 10 newspapers I have before me report President Akufo-Addo saying that, and I'll read one of these, voters will retain MPP based on good policies. This is the finder. And then there is, there's one interesting one that I saw on the Daily Guide. It's a bit difficult for me to get to, but he's basically saying that God will not punish Ghanaians with another NDC government. We don't seem to be getting a lot of, for want of a better expression, substance from political discourse, are we?
I think it depends on where that discourse occurs, at what time, because you would, political discourse covers a whole spectrum. So there are those times and those moments where there's serious engagement on the major issues, the major policies, the major programs. And then, of course, there are also those moments where you sort of have to throw some light on your political competitor or your political opponent and sort of cast him or her in the kind of light that says, given the nature of the competition that we are about to engage in, I am still the better choice, I'm still the preferred choice. And so that's where you tend to see why our political debates and our political conversations can swing from heavy engagement on substance in terms of the policies themselves, and then sometimes why we shift more towards looking at who the actual competitors are to talk about what they bring or do not bring to the competition that we are about to engage in.
So you feel that there is a balance needed?
Yes, and I mean, politics always has several characteristics, right? Political conversations have several features. And so, yes, that balance is needed. As I spent 2 days with persons from the media at CDD Ghana, one of the issues that I raised was that given the nature of political conversations and the fact that sometimes you can have actors on two polar opposites, that there comes a point where you need an independent arbiter, someone who moderates the conversation between the two opposing sides. Right?
And that's where we come in.
Yes, that's where I strongly believe that the media comes in, and that became the impetus for why I designed the kind of program that we designed to offer at CDD with funding from Star Ghana.
So tell us where the gap is. What's the gap that you sought to fill?
I think that one of the things that you notice when, for example, political party manifestos are released or major policy initiatives are announced, I think there's a missing framework that can be used to distill and make sense of what these policies mean. What is being offered, what does it contain, what problem is it trying to address, what problem is it trying to solve, how much is it going to cost, what are the possible implications. I think that because of that missing framework to guide the unpacking of all the things that are placed in the manifesto or all the things that are mentioned in a given policy initiative, it then becomes a challenge for the media to also then further unpack it, distill it, and disseminate it in terms of information sharing in such a way that you can get it to the general public, right?
That's a very interesting thought.
You want the average person to be able to understand that policy A has been announced, and this is the policy issue, this is the public problem it seeks to address. these are the implications, and even though we may not have the final cost, at least these are some of the financial and non-financial resources that may be needed to tackle and implement such a given policy.
Like I said, fascinating. Do you have any examples, can you share, of any such frameworks and how they play out elsewhere?
So in the framework that I developed for the training, it had two key dimensions. The things that you pay attention to when the policy is announced or when the manifesto is released. And then the second dimension of the framework was when it is being implemented, what are also some of the key issues that you have to raise.
Okay.
And then, of course, the first dimension has, what is being promised, how would it be delivered, how much would it cost, who will do what, when, and how. So again, it gives you some thinking framework that you can use to unpack these things. Then once you get to the implementation phase, you pose two basic questions. What is being done? And the most critical question for me then becomes, what difference does it make? Because I think that our conversations do well by cataloging achievements, by cataloging all the important things that we're doing. My line of profession is what we call institutional effectiveness. And one of the fights I always have with academic deans, academic programs is we always go back to them to say, we are not saying that the report that you brought to my office and all the good things that the academic program is doing is irrelevant. But the most important question is, after all of the investments in programs, in policies, what difference does it make? What difference has it made? How has that moved governance to the next level? How has that moved the society to the next level? And I think with that kind of framework, that you can begin to make sense of all of the things that happen in the name of good governance, and then be able to share that with citizens.
Okay, so I'll crave your indulgence and attack your framework with your framework.
Yes.
So your final question here is, what difference does it make?
Yes.
And what difference does this application make? I'm not talking about just in making a journalist sound or look smart, but also in the life of the average listener or the average Ghanaian.
Right.
What difference will this make?
I think the difference it would make is that all of a sudden, I believe very strongly that your average listener, the average citizen, will become better informed, because now you are beginning to point out and look for things that perhaps previously in reporting and covering the news on these important things were either being overlooked or were not being emphasized enough. And for me, I think that is what would make the difference for the average consumer of the news. Because sometimes I read a news item and I still can feel that there's something still missing, which is one of the things I shared with the participants on Monday and Tuesday, right? Which is there are still missing gaps, and therefore my goal is that how do you get to the media to the point where they can begin to fill those missing gaps, so that even if it's a 1-2 page story on a major policy initiative, I can walk away with a good understanding of, okay, this is what my government is intending to do in order to move the good governance needle another step higher.
Good governance is an expression I love to hear.
Right.
And the challenge that we have faced as a media organization and being a practitioner for years is that in the absence of what we can define as good governance, the media can only talk. So we have a series called Dear Nanado. We are airing issues. People are putting out their frustrations, but the response is a problem.
And when you say the response from
government.
Right. But I also think that there are enough frameworks or indices, right, that are used. So I'll give you an example. Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance, for example. I think that these are frameworks that exist that can be used to say, if we wanted to have a conversation about how well a country is progressing, what good things are happening, what challenges are facing, that you can reach out to some of these indices as a way of at least starting the conversation to say, these are the signals coming out from these indices, these are the signals coming out from these kinds of public opinion surveys. What does it say to us? What questions does it raise? And how do we report it in such a way that we can get the attention of those who have the power and the resources to be able to do something about it. And for me, I think, again, it boils down to how well the media can frame those stories and report them in such a way that it is not necessarily viewed as an indictment, but rather a reporting on the state of governance as expressed through these indices or as expressed through the kinds of public opinion surveys.
The challenge is this, though, and at the risk of sounding like I'm belaboring the point, the challenge exists that we can do all the great journalism we can do, but if government just does not act, that becomes a roadblock.
Right. And you're right, I do agree with that, but you also have to understand that there would always also be a time lag between when attention is drawn to a given public problem and when a response is given. And I guess sometimes, given the nature of the problem, certain problems may get immediate attention, or certain challenges or certain issues may get a bit of a delayed attention. So I think it's a question of...
So for you, it's about a time lag?
Precisely,
okay.
precisely.
Okay.
And especially also because you also have to say to yourself, but what's the issue and how pressing is the issue? Because remember, there are multitude of issues, limited time, limited resources, that is trying to engage the attention of the policymakers that you're trying to make sure that they can do something.
Dr. John Osae-Kwapong, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.